Good evening. Thank you for joining us at our Archives Unlocked series. This evening's topic is From Automobiles to Archives, and we are very happy to have with us Ms. Cassandra Tang, Assistant Conservator at the National Archives of Singapore, otherwise known as our resident cat whisperer, who also enjoys taking long hikes in her free time. Cassandra carries out conservation treatments for historical records at our Archives Conservation Lab and supports collections and exhibitions at the National Archives of Singapore, National Library, and the former Ford Factory. Tonight, she will share on how the former Ford Factory came to be, offer an insight into the exhibition, and share about the challenges that come with maintaining a permanent exhibition. Over to you, Cassandra.
Thank you for the introduction, Samira. Hello, and thank you all for attending July's edition of Archives Unlocked. Today, I'll be sharing with you on the former Ford Factory's exhibition on life during the Japanese occupation and on maintaining a permanent exhibition. I'll introduce you to the former Ford Factory and talk a little bit about the Art Deco design, and we'll take a little peek at some of the exhibition highlights before we go into what it takes to maintain a permanent exhibition. Finally, I'll share some resources and the opening hours of FFF. So hi, I'm Cassandra, and if you follow NAS's social media account, you might have spotted my face once or twice. I'm an assistant conservator with the National Archives of Singapore, working out of the Archives Conservation Lab. I've been here nearly 3 years now, and the department contributes to the conservation of historical records from the NAS collection and support for exhibitions at the National Library. So let's begin. As you head down Upper Bukit Timah Road, passing Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, and after Bukit Batok Nature Park, you turn left into FFF. The road leading up to the main building is the same path British soldiers walked when they surrendered on 15th February 1942. The former Ford Factory was the historic site where Lieutenant General Arthur Ernest Percival, the British general officer commanding Malaya, surrendered to General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Japanese commander of the 25th Army. In 2004, the National Archives of Singapore acquired the building, and in 2006, it opened to the public as Memories at Old Ford Factory. In 2016, the site underwent extensive development and saw a new repository was being developed to house the growing archival collection. In addition, anchoring on archival records and the significance of the site, NAS curated an exhibition showcasing the memories of life during the Japanese occupation. To the side of the main building, there's a small garden that features trivia on plants that were grown during the Japanese occupation. Papaya, corn, bananas, pineapples, tapioca, and sweet potato are some of the crops that were typically grown. Before we explore what's inside the former Ford Factory, let's take a look at the facade of the building. The building was designed by Émile Briget, a French structural engineer who was also involved in the construction of the Church of St. Teresa on Kampong Baru Road. When he designed the building, he sought to give the building a stately, functional look, exuding the aura of Art Deco style, but without the ornate frills. Art Deco is a movement in the decorative arts and architecture that originated in the 1920s and developed into a major style in Western Europe and the United States during the 1930s. A common feature in Art Deco designs are spires. Buildings were often decorated with tower-like structures that would make a simple square building seem more opulent. Decorative geometric windows and bright opulent colors are synonymous with the Art Deco period. Buildings incorporated bright colors against stark colors like black and white to create contrast. You can see that the facade is predominantly white with a bright splash of green from the windows. Rough, textured surfaces were juxtaposed against smooth plasterwork to give the building more character. If you look above the entranceway, the gray portion is actually textured. And here's a close-up of the textured surface. It might have been executed through the use of cement slip or watery cement and fingertips to make the indents. Some common Art Deco motifs include chevrons, pyramids, zigzags, and other geometric shapes. Here you can see the step pyramid motif is repeated throughout the facade, from the windows to the side of the entranceways and to the edges of the building. So now that we've looked at the exterior, we can take a look inside. But just before we proceed, here's the first pull. So A, what sort of crops did they grow during wartime Singapore? A, kale, B, sweet potato, C, coffee, D, rice. I think everyone's leaning towards sweet potato. Okay, I think we can end the poll now. Yes, so many of you got it right. It is sweet potato, and good spot in my slides just now. So in 2017, the exhibition Surviving the Japanese Occupation, War and Its Legacies was opened. The exhibition presents a holistic picture of the Japanese occupation of Singapore, covering the battle leading up to it, and it highlights the diverse experiences of people in Singapore during the war, occupation, and the period of post-war reconstruction. In the exhibition, we have 37 showcases that house 236 exhibits. The collection comprises personal possessions, publications, and maps from wartime Singapore. On display are records that document the daily struggle during war-occupied Singapore, watercolor paintings from a captive prisoner of war, newsletters from Japanese publishers, and also weaponry and equipment. The exhibition is separated into four main themes. In Zone 1, we have the introduction to the former Ford factory, and this area highlights the history of Ford factory and sets the scene for pre-war Singapore. In Zone 2, Fall of Singapore highlights the events leading up to that fateful moment, featuring three intertwining narratives of Japanese aggression, British defenses, and civilians in Singapore caught up in these larger forces of imperial struggle and war. In Zone 3, Becoming Sonan, we will learn about the acts of state-sanctioned violence, the promises of Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, and the lives of the ordinary people who tried to get by under these trying conditions. And finally, Zone 4, Legacies of War, rounds off the exhibition in contemplation on how we remember the war and its legacies. The Ford Motor Factory began operations in October 1941 as Ford Motor Works' first assembly plant in Southeast Asia. In that same year, Ford Factory joined in the war effort by assembling military trucks. Here's a photo of the Ford Factory from 1942. Just after a year it was first built, you can see that the main building remains largely unchanged since then. Using the VR companion app that is available for download, we can use augmented reality to take a look at what the factory used to look like in 1941. This screen capture was taken while using the app on the main cable display. And now you can see how it's been developed and how it looks like today. In 2006, it was gazetted as a national monument. And now it is time for our second poll. What is the name of the exhibition? First one is Surviving the Japanese Occupation, War and Its Legacies. B, Suffering During the Japanese Occupation, Hardship and Strife. C, Singapore Staying Alive, the Japanese Occupation. And finally D, Surviving the Japanese Rule, Legacies of War. So this one is testing whether or not you've been paying attention. Most of you have got the right answer. I think we can end the poll now. And yes, the answer is A, Surviving the Japanese Occupation, War and Its Legacies. So now let's take a little tour of the exhibition currently on display. Later on, I'll share more about how to care for and monitor the exhibition to make sure everything runs smoothly. So you can witness the fall of Singapore in the iconic Room of Surrender. You can actually enter the room where British soldiers signed their surrender to Japanese forces. Experience life during the Japanese occupation through Limbo Singh's account of events. On display are his personal diary that details his feelings and notes on management of Force 136. Force 136 was a group that was formed in June 1942 to infiltrate and collect information to prepare for the British recapture of Malaya. At his death at the hands of Japanese captors, he will go on to be remembered as a war hero with a memorial built in his name near Esplanade Waterfront. You can listen to the oral history accounts that have been collected by the Oral History Unit of the National Archives of Singapore. And here are some of the displays that you can also listen to. Empathize with people facing the grim reality of inflation and poverty, and see the increasing price of eggs per dozen. through the years in banana currency value. And war propaganda paintings by Taka Sakurai. He was an officer from the Japanese propaganda department who was commissioned to produce postcards of Singapore during Japanese rule. Sakurai visited the exhibition and donated 5 of his original paintings and postcards to NAS. These paintings reflect an idyllic landscape, far removed from the truth of wartime Singapore. You can also see through the eyes of prisoners of war and follow the story of Edward Parrish, who was taken as a prisoner of war through his letters and documents, amongst others. Discern the influence of post-war global events, the communism wave in Singapore, and appreciate primary sources that document our recovery as a nation. On display are some of the earliest forms of identification cards. And finally, reflect through art, contributions from students today, thought-provoking and moving pieces from students in Singapore on display showing themes of endurance, strength, change, and hope. And now on to our third poll. How much did a dozen eggs cost in 1943? Is it $240, 60 cents, $12, or $43? Okay, the poll is quite divided on this one. I think everyone's a bit unsure. All those prices were up on the screen just now, but maybe not for the year you're thinking of. I think we can close the poll now. Okay, most of you guessed 60 cents. Well, the answer is $12. So moving on, finally, to exhibition upkeep. I'll be sharing a little bit more on environmental conditions, on monitoring and maintenance, and routine upkeep. So these are very important when setting up and maintaining an exhibition. And here are some of the headlines that highlight the importance of ensuring a safe and stable environment. We keep the exhibition environment at 19 degrees centigrade with an allowable fluctuation of plus minus 1 degree. The published guidelines from the American Institute of Conservation, AIC, give a temperature range of 15 to 25 degrees, so we are well within those margins. And RH, relative humidity, is not the same as humidity. Relative humidity is how much water vapor is in the air compared to how much it could hold at that temperature before condensation occurs. The recommended range is 55% plus minus 5. In line with guidelines from AIC, they recommend a 45 to 55% with an allowable fluctuation of plus minus 5% per 24-hour window. Fluctuations must be minimized, otherwise this happens. Fluctuations in incorrect storage in temperature and relative humidity bring about unsuitable storage conditions, and extreme fluctuations in temperature and relative humidity may activate dormant mold, accelerate foxing, and may cause warping of records. So here are some examples of our day-to-day life. In the office with aircon on, you can see that the RH is 69.2%, the temperature is 22.4, and the DP is 16.5 degrees. So DP refers to dew point at which condensation starts to form. So if the office environment suddenly dropped to 16.5%, you would start to see condensation maybe occur on the windows, on the walls, because there's so much air in there, there's so much water vapor in the air, and it just needs to condense in order to maintain because it's reached at 100%. So moving on to light, the light spectrum is divided into 3 main groups. Ultraviolet or UV radiation are wavelengths that are shorter than 400 nanometers and invisible to the human eye. UV radiation is the most damaging form of light to museum collections. And then there is visible light. This is the spectrum of light between 400 to 760 nanometers that humans can see and are separated into different colors of the rainbow. And the third, infrared radiation. Humans also can't see infrared, which is anything longer than 716 nanometers, but we perceive it as heat. Most types of light contain all 3 components of varying levels. Daylight has lots of ultraviolet radiation, whereas tungsten bulbs emit significant amounts of infrared. Although all wavelengths of light are damaging, UV radiation is especially harmful to library and archival materials because of its high level of energy. And to read light levels, we use lux. So the intensity of visible light is measured in lux. 1 lux equals to 1 lumen per square meter. The recommended range is below 100 lux for exhibited records and below 50 lux for light-sensitive records. Some possible light-sensitive records include the William Hacksworth watercolor paintings, Limbo Singh's diary, and records with handwritten pen ink and stamp ink. So prolonged exposure to light may cause fading of media, photographs, and in the case of severe UV damage, will lead to weakening and discoloration of records. Intensity and long exposure times can lead to fading or changing of colors in dyes and colorants, and ultraviolet radiation will lead to weakening, bleaching, and yellowing of paper and other organic materials. All of these changes can diminish readability, affect the aesthetic appreciation of artwork, and impact access to the information contained therein. Even if you take a faded photograph down and store it in the dark, it will not revert to its original appearance and will continue to fade when you take it out again. So this damage is irreversible and it's cumulative. To get the most accurate measure, the light meter that we're using here should be placed where the object will be located and situated just as the object will be when in the display. So light and ultraviolet radiation, UV, provides energy to fuel chemical reactions that lead to deterioration. And while UV is blamed for most of this damage, visible light is also problematic. So you can see in the examples, in my office, when it's lit, you can see the 0 UV, but there's a very high lux level of 552. In the office, if I turn off the lights, so 0 UV as expected, but you can see that there's still some lux of 0.6, and it's probably likely from the ambient light from under the door, or maybe seeping past blinds. And finally, one of the biggest number outside, even when overcast, it was super cloudy that day, the UV level is 940. There's 4,667 lux. So there's a lot of light energy present. So even if it's cloudy, you should definitely walk around with an umbrella to protect your skin. And finally, pole 4. So what happens to paper if it is subjected to extreme fluctuations in temperature and relative humidity? A, spontaneous combustion. Okay. B, mold growth. C, melts. And D, vaporizes. So 10 more seconds on the clock for you to get your polls in. Okay, I think most of you have got the right idea. I'm glad no one picked melts because I was up. I couldn't think of anything else that horrible would happen to paper under light. Okay, I think we can close the poll now. And yes, mold growth happens. That's because when you have fluctuations, remember dew point condensation? So that condensation is in the air and it actually kind of lands on the paper, and then the mold that has been dried out, actually, they use it as a source to grow from. So you can see all the little black spots, that's mold, and that's not good. It's very hard to clean. So always try to keep your collections in a stable environment. Okay, finally, environmental monitoring. So now that we've established how important it is to maintain a stable environment for the exhibits, we actually use these two devices to keep track of readings. On the left, you have the Bluetooth data logger, and on the right, we have the analog data logger. This allows us to check the readings from outside the showcase without having to open it, and therefore disrupting the microenvironment. So the showcases are all generally, imagine like a giant airtight container, and that's what the showcase is built to be, so that whenever we seal it, the air inside stays the same. And we use desiccants to control the RH that is already present. So these preconditioned silica gels have the ability to both absorb and release atmospheric moisture in order to maintain a preset relative humidity within a sealed environment. It is capable of absorbing up to 5 times as much moisture as regular density silica. is available in 40%, 50%, and 60% relative humidity. So the application for preconditioned silica extends beyond showcases. You can buy it yourself from conservation sites. I think sometimes even Amazon has it. And you can use it for the storage of musical instruments, leather goods, or any other materials that are sensitive to moisture fluctuations. And here you can see my colleague Michelle is loading exhausted desiccants into a drying oven that our colleagues at the National Library very kindly let us borrow. Process of reconditioning is basically applying heat in a controlled environment to dry out the desiccants so that they can be reused again. It's very similar to how you might microwave or leave silica gel under the sun to dry. And this method is more sustainable instead of throwing away and replacing with brand new desiccants with each change. With 37 showcases and 236 exhibits, there's quite a bit of work to be done. And these are some photos to show you how we access under the showcases to change out the desiccants for reconditioning. And occasionally, we do need to use a ladder to access the showcases to adjust displays or check the monitoring devices. Finally, here are two of my lovely colleagues, Michelle and Sharifa, who are carrying out condition surveys to the showcase glass to avoid disrupting the microclimate. The purpose of these surveys is to monitor any changes to the records on display so that if we do notice something different, if there is mold growing, we can remove it and make sure to carry out some conservation before putting it back, or if we need to retire the exhibit. And finally, the last poll. What do conservators do during routine upkeep? A, cleaning showcase windows. B, condition surveys. C, changing light bulbs. D, hunting cockroaches. Okay, 10 seconds on the clock. Should be an easy one, right? Okay, I think we can close the poll now. Okay, everyone got it right. It was just from the previous slide. So yes, we do condition surveys. I mean, sometimes you do, clean the showcases if you happen to be there and it's like a fingerprint smudge, but it's not part of our routine. We don't sort of make it a point to go down to clean showcases. And then here's some information if you want to visit the former Ford factory. So they're open Tuesdays to Sundays, 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. It's free if you're a Singapore citizen. Foreign visitors pay $3 per person, which is not very much money. And it's quite an exciting exhibition if you want to learn more about Singapore history. And here's some activity sheets that you can download from the FFF website. You can scan the QR code to access the links. And please feel free to use your activity sheet. They're meant for primary school students and secondary school students. But if you want to, just work on something as you walk through the exhibit, please feel free to use them as well. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you all for attending July's edition of Archives Unlocked.